Hello and welcome to what is hopefully a good explanation on how to get a quintuple chest in Minecraft Vanilla 1.12. I discovered a pretty simple way to get it when I was trying to figure out a way to make a simple setup for falling spawner block. And basically I looked into the code to see if there was any way to keep the dungeon floor from replacing observers. And I discovered some kind of obsession my Mojang has with chests apparently. But more on that later. First, let's talk about how the game places a dungeon and yeah. So, for this part of the explanation, I'm going to assume you already know what are the basic requirements for a dungeon to generate. But yeah, basically when this chunk tries to populate, it's going to try to place a dungeon in this location. And when the basic requirements are met, the game will first empty out the room, while also replacing the floor with cobblestone and mossy cobblestone, and also replacing the walls with cobblestone. So if I use commands to first regenerate that chunk and then repopulate it, we're going to see that, yeah, a dungeon generates. So after the room has been cleared out, the game will attempt to generate 2 chests. And the game actually makes more than 2 attempts, but it will eventually place only 2 chests. So there are 2 requirements for a chest to be placed. So first of all, the location in which the chest wants to generate has to be an air block, and also this block needs to have exactly 1 non-air neighbor. So for example, this location here is an invalid spot for a chest to generate because all the 4 neighbors it has are air blocks. But for example, this location right here would have been a good location for a chest because it has only 1 non-air neighbor right next to it. So after the game has attempted to place the chests, it's finally going to place the spawner in the middle of the dungeon, and this placement never fails. It will always place a spawner in here. Okay, great, but where's the trick? We don't want to generate a spawner or a dungeon, we want a quintuple chest. So like I mentioned in the intro, Mojang apparently has some kind of obsession with chests. And the game really doesn't want to replace any chests during dungeon generation. So if I put a couple chests in the floor of the dungeon, and maybe a couple in the middle of the dungeon, and maybe a couple inside the walls, and now if I regenerate and repopulate the chunk, you can see that none of those chests got replaced. There is actually a way for a chest to be replaced. Like I said, spawner generation will never fail, so if there was a chest in the middle of the dungeon, it would have been replaced. But other than that, the game will not try to replace any chest with cobblestone or air. So another interesting thing you can do with this is that you can, in a way, manipulate the RNG of the dungeon. So yeah, if I generate a dungeon here, we will see that the dungeon will always try to generate a chest here and here. So if I break those and the spawner and generate the dungeon once again, it's going to always generate those 2 chests in the same position. The fuck? Hi, editor JKM here. So while looking through the footage, I noticed that when I break the first chest it drops items, but when I break the second chest it doesn't. This basically means there was probably some client-server desync. So the server thought that that chest in the back was still there, so when I click the button to basically generate the dungeon again, the conditions were different, so the chest also generated differently. But my point still stands. With the same conditions, chests will generate exactly the same way. Alright, but if I place a chest somewhere in the floor, then the game will not try to place a cobblestone or mossy cobblestone in here. And so the RNG function would have been called a different amount of times by the time we get to the chest placement. Which means that the RNG itself is also going to be different when we get to the chest placement. And so we can expect a different placement of the chest inside of the dungeon room. So let's see if this changed. Yeah. So now we actually got some bad RNG and none of the 2 chests generated. And I can show you once again. No matter how many times I click this button, a chest will never generate in here. But if I place another chest, we may expect yet another outcome. Oh, so now we are back to the same placement, but if I place a 3rd chest, we may have a different outcome, yeah. Now we have a chest in here, and another chest in the floor. And yeah, we have yet another combination of chest locations. So this trick might be useful for making a setup, but more on that later. Alright, everything's nice, but how do we get to triple, quadruple and quintuple chests from here? Well, if we know where the dungeon will try and succeed to generate the loot chest, we can pre-place our own chest in a way that will result in one of those illegal chests. Like if I place a double chest here, and I know that a chest will generate here, we should get a triple. So let's take a look at the quintuple chest setup I made for Prototech. Yes, it's the same dungeon. If we prepare this dungeon room like that and repopulate the chunk, we can see that a chest got placed here. And with the same conditions, it will always appear in the same place. Alright, so we know that a chest will always generate here every single time. So what if I pre-place a double chest in here and repopulate the chunk? Well, a loot chest got placed here, and if I click on this chest right there, we get a triple. The UI is only gonna get worse from here on, and we're gonna encounter a lot of invisible chests, because the game developers never expected people to actually interact with triple, quadruple, or quintuple chests. So if we apply the same principles while knowing where both of the chests will try to generate, we can also get to a quadruple chest, which I will show right now. So I know for a fact that with those conditions, the game will always try to generate chests here and here during the dungeon generation. And of course we will get a quadruple chest in here. So let's try it out. So yeah, we can see that a chest got generated here, and also we have another invisible chest in here. And if I click on this chest, we get a quadruple. So how do we get from quadruple chest to a quintuple? Because, well, this dungeon will not generate a third chest. And well, how about we just pre-place more chests? How about we place 3 chests instead of 2? But now you see this place right here becomes an invalid spot for a chest to generate, because this spot right here has 3 non-air neighbors. So a chest will never generate in here. And also, I physically cannot place a chest here. So how do we go for quintuple? So there are actually 2 ways to achieve it. You either find a chunk that generates a second overlapping dungeon, and basically the first dungeon generates the quadruple, and the second dungeon then adds another chest from its own generation to form a quintuple, or you use the simple method, double population. Basically, the general idea behind the double population method is that you save state and regenerate this chunk twice, and so it also tries to place this dungeon twice. And because of that, it also tries to generate those loot chests twice. And because the game will not remove any chests while clearing out the room during the second population, the quadruple chest we got in the first run will stay behind, and another chest from the second population can be attached to the quadruple, forming a quintuple. So how does it look in an actual, setup, and not in theory? So when you approach this location for the first time ever, this chunk will be, of course, ungenerated, so it will generate, then it will populate itself, and it will try to place a dungeon up there, but of course there would be nothing up here. So after you fly in, you would save state this chunk, and then you would build the setup for your quadruple chest. So in this case, it's gonna look like that. So then you fly away, wait for an autosave, and when you fly back in, this chunk will now generate once again and populate once again, but now it's actually going to succeed in placing a dungeon here. So if we simulate it with those command blocks, it will place a dungeon in here, and it will create a quadruple chest. But we've seen it. How do we get to quintuple from here? Now this part is very setup dependent. In this case, all I need to do to modify the setup is to plug this hole here. So now the dungeon will try to generate a chest here and here, and that's exactly what we want. We want a chest to be placed in this spot, so this will result in a quintuple chest in this position. Alright, so now if I were to fly away and fly back in, this chunk would generate for the third time, and now it would be able to place the dungeon for the second time, and it will place those chests here and here. So let's simulate it. Yeah, So a chest got placed here and then another here, but it's invisible because quintuple chest stuff. And here we go. So I'm not gonna make a full tutorial on how to make your own setup, but I will generally mention what you can do to obtain it. First of all, the area that you want to generate the quintuple chest in has to be unpopulated for obvious reasons. When you decide on the area, you either want to write a program to search for a setup for you automatically, or if you want to do it manually, use carpetmod's chunk repop command and use it in combination with Omeganx's dungeon finder. The download link is in the description. After you download it, you select two dungeons in a cluster, because if you select one, it sometimes gives out false positives. Then you enter the world seed, the range, and the start position, but remember that those chords are chunk chords, not block chords. Then you select the generate set block command option and press start, and now you're ready to make a setup. Generally, the best way to make a setup is to first make a quadruple chest setup, and then you want to find an easy way to modify it for the 5th chest. To make the setup itself, you definitely want to use the chest in the floor RNG manipulation I showed a bit earlier, as well as you want to place some extra chests in the room itself to prevent unwanted chests from generating. So I hope this video was helpful, and see ya!